So how is life going in the pandemic?
Um, that is a good question. It's a little awkward. I've got a date at some point in the next week, but we keep pushing it back because she's not entirely comfortable with the exposure that I've had.
Ah,
I was
and you're generally
on the
pretty
campus.
responsible.
I'm generally pretty responsible, but I was on the campus of my university this past weekend,
An
and
for now unnamed Midwestern University.
yes, and with no joke, within 30 minutes of me leaving campus, the county's health department issued a shelter-in-place order for students at the university because cases were climbing so quickly. Now,
Yikes.
I think the people I saw on campus, the four of them, were very responsible. They were in an apartment together. They hadn't seen anyone else. Um, but it made my date a little nervous. So the weird thing about living in a pandemic right now is it put my date off a week or so.
Yeah, I'm sure that's gotta impact the dating scene.
I'm honestly shocked I could get a date at all in a pandemic. Like, how do you meet someone new when everyone else is a potential, threat to your life?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I was talking to one of my professors about how it's so awkward to talk to new people because it's like having a boundaries conversation on the first date, but you're having a first date with everybody every day.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So that's my life in the pandemic. Anything interesting about your life in the pandemic?
Well, at my different unnamed Midwestern University of somewhat smaller size than yours, randomly selected me for testing, which I'll do tomorrow. We've got a program where I think in the first couple weeks, we couldn't test every student when they came to campus. We've got too many people, but we randomly did I think a third of the on-campus students at least in the first while, and now they just try and keep going through stuff. So I got randomly selected and signed up for a time, and tomorrow I'll do like a self-administered test. I'm not symptomatic or anything, but it'll be. I think it's always good to know. Some people get them and they're like, "Oh, it's such a hassle," and I'm like, "Oh, like a free test that's convenient for me to get? Like I'm all for it. Like I just want to know."
Yeah. Do you have to do a nose swab or is it a spit test?
Nose swab. Yeah,
Okay.
the not fun ones, but
Hmm. Right. Right.
I haven't heard my. I know. I was about to say university name. I know another unnamed university used the spit test. Mine hasn't. I I don't know how. Like I haven't heard much about them. Like I just
Yeah.
I kind of distrust them, not for any sort of basis of a reason, but just because I haven't heard good things about them. I also haven't heard bad things.
Yeah. So my university is using spit tests as a screener. The Food and Drug Administration has not cleared them to be a test for the virus,
Yeah.
um, but it is a way to screen for the virus, is what they're calling it, because it's not officially a test.
Yeah.
My university is able to do the screener because this particular protocol was invented at my university.
Ah.
So,
Yeah.
it,
That'll make things easy to do probably.
yes, it is a little bit less precise than the PCR of an actual test, but it doesn't require any live virus, and it is generally a decent indicator of whether you're sick or not.
And then if you come up positive, do you go and get a nose test, or they just be like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, that's the protocol. I
interesting.
signed up for the testing regimen on campus to have my spit collected, but the university has not been very communicative about how to do it. They are starting up a program with all 40,000 undergrads, you know,
Um,
theoretically. Not everyone's in on campus this fall, but all the people in the area are supposed to sign up for this screening program.
yeah. Do they do any like random testing or not?
Not that
Although
I know of.
you generally don't like, there's not very many people on campus, are there? Most of the, especially undergraduates, are not on campus, right?
Correct. There is none of the dorms that have communal bathrooms have occupants, and of the suite style dorms, they're at a quarter capacity, so one person per suite.
Mm. Yeah, I
So it's
suppose. Yeah, we should probably kind of go over the general situation of what we're at. Like I am living on campus at a Midwestern university that has a student body of between like around 25,000 or so,
yep.
roughly in that area, and we are on campus for now. Um, a large percentage of our student body lives off campus, very close to campus. Our classes are hybrid, and there's some level of constant change. So for me right now, I have 2 classes that meet in person, and that means that I'm on like in person on campus 3 times a week for those classes. And then I've got a couple classes that are online. I've got 3 labs. I'm a STEM major. 3 labs, only one of which meets in person, and it met online for the first 2 weeks. And now I had my first in person today lab for organic chemistry too. Before that, it was all online, which went well. 1 person to 1 hood, smaller sections and everything.
Right.
But it would have been brutal if everything was online for Oreo.
Yeah. My situation, I am enrolled at a Midwestern university that's not quite twice the size of Noah's. And I canceled my on-campus housing contract because all my classes were online and I didn't feel safe in the dorms. So I'm currently living in an apartment in the same state as my university. We're trying to keep personal details off.
Keeping broad, you know.
Yeah.
If someone was really trying, they could figure it out, but like it's just impossible at a certain point to keep anonymity. But we're not going to make it easy.
Exactly. So I am not living on campus or near campus, but most of my friends are still in the area of my university.
And while I'm living on campus, my housing style is an apartment style. So I have my own little room. We have a bathroom in our unit. We have a kitchen. So I, have my own space. I'm not sleeping right close to someone. I also canceled most of my meal plan. I used to have a meal plan where I had like 2 meals a day for restaurants around campus, and I canceled it for 2 reasons. One is that 3 reasons actually. One being there's just less offerings for food around campus, especially close to my dorm. The closest dining hall to my dorm is pretty much completely closed, and so it would have been a pain in the butt to go walk to get food. 2, I think it would be better to just minimize exposure. I think dining halls of the kind of sanctioned campus activities are probably the riskiest. Of course, like off-campus parties are the real threat, but of the things that are sanctioned and okay on campus, I think dining halls are the worst because you have people without their masks on eating close to each other. Yeah, and so, I didn't want to risk that. I can cook. I've got a kitchen. And also, before I came to campus, I called up our campus dining services, and I was like, hey, so if campus gets shut down, will I get my meal plan money back? And they're like, we don't know. And we have a system where within the first week or 2 of classes, you can change, cancel, add to your meal plan, whatever you want for no penalty. And I was like, so will you know if I'll get a refund before the due date to like drop your meal plan if you want to? And they're like, well, probably not. And I just thought that was real suspicious. I think I'd probably get a refund. I got a refund last year when we went online, but I'm not about to risk that. Meal plans are expensive.
Seriously. Yeah. And you have an apartment style, so you can afford to do that on campus. My university does not offer housing like that.
Yeah. No, my housing's for on-campus housing. I've got some nice dorms.
So for people listening to the podcast, perhaps the week we put it out, this may not be very interesting. But we thought we'd open the podcast every week with a little slice of pandemic life, and that it might be a very interesting segment in years to come when all of this is hopefully behind us.
Yeah. No, and even if nobody ever listens to it, I'm sure I'll listen back to it and, in my older age, and it will be interesting to see what life was like. And it's also just like it's so omnipresent in our lives that if we're going to talk about our experience, roll credits, it would just be egregious not to mention it because it impacts most things.
Absolutely. I think humans have a really great tendency to normalize things, to get used to new realities.
Yeah, and most of the time, I think that's I was just gonna say, like most of the time, that's a great adaptation. Like it's very adaptive.
But the current epidemiological and political climate is really unprecedented. A good friend of ours was saying recently that her grandmother was telling her that she has never experienced a year like 2020. And I think that as young people, we often lack the perspective to say, wow, times are really this weird. But they are, and they certainly feel that way.
Like I think, thinking about the, somewhat, past 100 years or whatever in the United States, I think you could make a good case that there have been times that have been maybe harder, right, or worse. But I think maybe times being so unprecedented or like weird, you can make a case for 2020. Like
Certainly in the span of a human lifespan. I think maybe in the 1920s or 30s things felt like this, but that was a long time ago from a human perspective,
Yeah. And of course we can't know how those people really felt, at least, not in the same context now. But yeah, I think there's part of it too of, if you try to think about thinking historically, okay, what are some bad things that have happened? And bad things on a global, or on a broad scale. Because also, if you think about even the past 50 years, there have been some very horrible things for select groups of people. Like
Absolutely.
me being a white guy, if things are going well in the world, they're often going well for me. So of course there have been experiences where stuff has been awful for people who have not had the same privileges I had, but on a broader scale, impacting everyone, I think we're just getting hit from all sides, especially in the,
mostly in the United States.
Well, that's all we can really talk about. This is compounding issues, abroad, in places that don't have the same wealth the United States does.
Certainly.
But the experience in the United States is different, being that we're not as used to it.
That's a good
things
point.
have been, majority wise, for at least for a lot of people in the United States, things have been very good. We definitely have our problems, and there are definitely people that we have not served. But in the past 100 years, the United States has done pretty good for itself.
Yeah.
And so we're not used to hardship.
No, and I think East Asian countries like Singapore, Japan, Hong Kong, China, South Korea have handled this pandemic very well.
Oh, Japan's numbers were crazy. Japan, or was it Japan who just got right on it, right? With their testing, and Korea.
South Korea as well.
Korea,
did very
South
well. And part of the reason is this isn't quite so unprecedented for them. They've had SARS outbreaks before, and they have the infrastructure in place to really jump on them. And I think the last time that there was a disease that forced everybody internationally to grapple with it was 1918. The Spanish flu pandemic was the last time there was something this international, and this big.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the H1N1 scare at all back 2014, 2009?
Not particularly, maybe a little bit, but it was nothing. Even Ebola, which in the developed
Ebola
world,
was 2014.
Even in the developed world, it's not that much of a threat, unless something changes drastically about it. But even that was such a, some people freaked out about it, but that was such a blip,
Absolutely.
It was mostly concern for outside of the U.S. For African nations.
Yeah, and I mean, the last time there was an outbreak, the 2009 H1N1 outbreak, for example, I was 8 years old, right? I was a child.
This pandemic has been going on for nearly half a year. It's been impacting us. So I think a question I want to ask you is, when did you first know it was what it is? When did you first know it was serious, at least for you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hardly had time to think when it began. I came back from spring break on a Sunday night, and by Wednesday morning, my university had canceled in-person classes. So, there was a really kind of jovial atmosphere coming back from spring break. All the students were really excited, and we're looking forward to the kind of the end of the semester. And there was a really shockingly fast time frame.
That's crazy.
The first universities in the United States to shut down, I think, were like Harvard in Boston, and maybe some around Seattle shut down Monday or Tuesday of that week. And it was kind of a big deal for us. It was like, oh, haha, these universities shut down. Um, Harvard, quite honestly, handled it kind of poorly. They told other students, you have 12 hours to get out of the dorms.
Yeah, that's a
That
bit
may have been
intense.
Brown. That might have actually been Brown University. I'm not sure.
Either way.
Um, Either way, so it was news because these universities shut down and did it rather poorly. So, but I had never considered that would be something that I'd have to face. That was something that was going to be
That
contained in
sound effect.
Seattle and wouldn't be a big deal. So Wednesday morning, I showed up at my calculus lecture, and there was a big hubbub. People were talking, and the professor got up and had some difficulty getting the class to quiet down, and said, "Well, for those of you who haven't seen the email, at this point it was 10:30. The email had gone out about 9:15. He said, for those of you who haven't seen the email, this will be our last in-person class for the semester." And that really taken me back because I hadn't seen the email. The email was effective noon today, 3 hours from when the email went out, all in-person classes are canceled.
That's wild.
Yeah. So, I mean, just shockingly fast. I woke up that morning, I don't know, thinking about what I wanted to eat for dinner. And by the time I got to my first class, everything was canceled. And so that Thursday, the very next day, I think there was a bit of panic had set in. And I literally just grabbed all the stuff out of my dorm I could, threw it in the back of a car, and drove home. Part of that was hastened by the fact that a cousin of mine was at another university in our state and was being kicked out of the dorms. I had to go pick her up. So it was a really chaotic time. A lot of my classes were just canceled for that week, for the end of the week. But that weekend, I went back to my university and cleared out my dorm. Less than a week after spring break, the dorm was empty, gone, no one was there. And I cleaned out all my stuff and I brought it home. And at that point, my university was still claiming they were going to come back for in-person exams. But I think that by that weekend, seeing how fast cases were climbing in Italy at that point was really what everyone was talking about, cases in Italy. And so by then, I kind of figured, oh, this is going to be around for a while. And I think for maybe the first week or so after my university shut down, I thought, okay, we'll shut down for 2 weeks to a month, and then it'll be back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
But within that first month, or within the first 2 weeks, rather, cases started to pick up in New York City really badly. And by that point, I knew it was here to stay. We weren't going back for exams.
There was no way we were going to get back down to below the threshold for them to cancel. They canceled when we were in the teens in our state of cases, and it was only rising.
Yeah, and so the big outbreaks, like New York City and elsewhere, were hundreds of cases, and that was back before we had good testing infrastructure. So that was back when we were maybe catching 1 in 50 cases with the test.
Which also, I just kind of thought of this. That was back when they said don't wear masks, or when they said it wasn't that you don't wear them, but it was, hey, you don't need to save them for healthcare workers.
Yeah,
which is just wild. Like,
right.
I get why they did it. I with the understanding, with the knowledge they had, it was the best choice for them to make. But thinking now, it's like that's so alien.
Mm-hmm. Now, I own half a dozen masks. I wash them with my laundry every week. I wear them every time I step outside my house.
I'll watch TV, from 2 years ago or whatever, and be like, oh my gosh, they're not wearing masks, and it's like, oh, they didn't have to.
That's so funny. It's so funny you mentioned that. I saw what was it? It was like a TV show where they had a meeting, like a council meeting or something. And I was like, couldn't this be a Zoom meeting? Why are they all so close to each other?
Yeah, it's so weird.
Strange. So that's, for me, that's when I really knew it was serious. What was your experience like at your university?
So my university closed, I think, a day or two after yours. And I think it might have been a day after yours. And so I was hearing from my friends who are at your university and others that closed that, like, their universities, like, send screenshots of these emails of, like, in 3 hours, everything's canceled. And I was just like, oh, okay. And my university is a little bit smaller. So I thought, okay, maybe it'll take a little bit longer to reach this. But like at that point, I knew that it was days, not weeks. And so there was the next day there were rumors that there was going to be an email sent out, and it was like, oh, there's going to be an email sent out at 3. Oh, there's going to be an email sent out at 4. Oh, there's going to be an email sent out at 5:30. You know, none of those times were correct, but there was indeed an email sent out. And tragically, I was going to speak at, I think it was a Wednesday or a Thursday when my university canceled, and I was going to speak at a conference that Saturday. And actually come visit you and one of my other friends at your university that weekend.
Yeah, I remember you were going to come stay with me. I was really excited.
Yeah. And so it was like 6:30 or something at night, and I was walking into a research meeting. We were going to prep for this conference. And we kind of in our emails, we were like, we don't know if this conference is going to happen, but we thought there was a decent chance we were going to make it for that. And then walking into the door, like we all were like checking our emails compulsively, like every 5 seconds. Walking into that meeting, we just like right when I walked in the door, I got just an email from my like university official office of the president. I was like, well, this is it, and it indeed was it. And so the next day, my parents came to, or no, one of my friends came to pick me up. We took, just my university as well was like, we're gonna be back in 3 weeks, we're gonna be back in a month, whatever. So I just took what I could pack in an hour or so, what I would need. I live pretty close to my university, so it wouldn't be that much of a hassle to come pick stuff up if I needed it. But even then, like that's when I knew, like, okay, like things are closing, okay. But even then, it didn't feel real or serious. Like I remember, I mean, we didn't as a population, like there wasn't a consistent message of like, oh, how do we deal with this? Like I came home and there was cases in the teens and then in the low 20s and then in the whole state. And so like I was seeing some of my high school friends like in their house, and of course we weren't wearing a mask at the time, and weren't like keeping our distance. And then like things started to pick up, and I think it was probably when there were the first few deaths in our state. It was like, oh, and there was a bit more of a consistent message of what you're supposed to do about it and how you're supposed to behave. That I really started to realize that, like, oh wow, this is not only like, is this impacting me, but like this is serious and this is gonna stick around for a while.
Yeah, I remember in the early days, back in mid-March, even by the time I arrived at home later that week, we went to the grocery store and bought $300 worth of groceries, which was actually kind of impressive because the grocery stores were cleaned out. I remember like you couldn't buy toilet paper or water or flour, and my mother was reading the news about the pandemic obsessively, especially stuff in Italy. And so she, from the very beginning, we don't see friends, we don't go outside the house. And so I think my experience is a little different than yours in that it was a much more sudden transition away from living with my friends at university to, I don't think I saw anyone for 3 months. I didn't leave my house for 3 months,
Yeah, that's intense.
Yeah. So I don't know. You are dating someone, and you were at the time.
Yeah.
And you continued to see her, and I think that maybe made your experience a little different. But for me, the first 2.5 or 3 months that I was at home, I did not see anyone, and I'm an extrovert. That was very hard on me.
Yeah.
And like I called a friend of mine every single night for I think 80 or 90 days in a row. We called every evening. And that was probably the only thing that kept me sane because I was an extrovert and I hadn't seen anyone in 3 months.
Yeah. I mean, we're both we're both extroverts. I'm a hardcore extrovert. Like, yes. I take those Myers-Briggs and I get like 97% extrovert. I'm like, oh well, tracks. But yeah, no. Yeah, I definitely. It's a lot easier to even once we started to know about masks and social distancing. My girlfriend and I, we initially briefly were like, okay, maybe we're gonna do, social distancing, and we maybe did that for a week or two, and mostly we just like go on walks outside. But it got to a point where it's like, oh, okay, this is going to be months, not weeks, it's unsustainable. Like it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so we talked about it and made the decision of like, okay, we're both going to try and be careful, but we're not going to social distance from each other because it's just infeasible at a certain point. We knew we were going to break, and we'd rather kind of do that in a conscious way versus just like give in sometime.
Yeah. And I think there are some friends of ours who continue to behave unsafely. And I think in the early days of the pandemic, back in March and April, um, everyone was much more cautious than they are now on their own personal scale. So, like I said, I saw nobody back then in March and April. Now I'm willing to see people. I had a single friend over for dinner this evening because I know that he's been safe.
Yeah.
And that would have been unthinkable to me in April. Which is a little bit ironic because back in April cases were relatively low and they're much worse now.
I think that's just classic fear of the unknown. We know how to manage things better, and like, are people, and myself included, taking more risks now, even when this might be the worst time to take risks? Yes, because like normalcy bias, we're getting used to it.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's less scary because we know what to expect.
Mm-hmm. And I think additionally, in the early days, there was a lack of information, which I think is really hard to recreate looking back on it.
Mm-hmm.
There were 2 months where we had no clue what was going on. We didn't know
how deadly it was. We didn't know how it spread.
Yeah, we didn't know if our case numbers were accurate. We were seeing pictures of northern Italy, with people lying on the hallways in hospitals because they didn't have enough beds. And we were terrified that was going to be us next. And so, in some sense, because we overreacted, it wasn't an overreaction.
Yeah. It's very easy to look back on our past selves and be like, why didn't you just do this? But when kind of the future is foggy and we don't know what it's going to look like and we don't have all the information, it's a lot harder to make those decisions. And I think most of the time, whether you're talking about yourself or even thinking about government officials, it's best to give yourself the benefit of the doubt and be like, hey, with the information, like I made the decision with the information I had. I can't apply the information I have now to past decisions. Like right. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's very hard to unknow that information now to make a decision again. But over the summer, I think our experience was a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. Consciously or otherwise, you and I and 2 other friends of ours decided that was our group for the summer.
Yeah.
And those were the people we would see, and we didn't really see anyone outside of that group of 4.
Yeah, I even had which was like, it wasn't even super conscious, but I kind of really noticed it when I was having a conversation with my dad, talking about one of my other friends who kind of wasn't in our little pod. And he was like, oh, why aren't you seeing this guy so much recently? You haven't hung out with him in a while. I thought you guys were really close. And I'm like, oh, we are. Like, we call, we're really close, but like, we just kind of ended up in different groups. He's like, you're in different friend groups now? I'm like, no. Like, we're in the same friend group still. But like, we ended up in different, like, air quotes, pandemic groups. We just, we would be a big connection because he sees people that I don't and I see people that he doesn't. So if we hung out, we would be connecting a lot of people.
Right. And I, like I said, I don't think that was even a conscious decision. Those were just, our close friends who were in town and being safe.
Yeah.
Was really what it came down to. But in retrospect, that was a really good decision we made to say these are the people we're going to see and we will see them in a safe manner and such.
Yeah.
And that kept me sane through the summer. So
it was really good to like have that consistency of like, we didn't have that having boundaries conversations on the first date, every time, because we kind of set precedents and we did similar things. It was like, okay, like we've done go hang out on a blanket at a park with these people before, so we kind of know what to expect with them.
Right. And I think the other half of it is my grandfather was living with me this summer. I believe he still is. Yes, he still is. I don't know why I said that. It's my house. He is still living with us. And so there's a guy who's over 70 in my household. I had to be very careful, more so
Yeah.
than some of our other friends. And so that group of four was selected because I knew that you were safe, and you were safe partly on my behalf.
Yeah.
So
And like in some ways that kept me accountable, which was good.
right, right. Um, I have seen since college campuses have reopened, a lot of our friends, not a lot, some of our friends have gotten sick,
Yeah.
and they are not people that I would have been the first choice to see. But I think it is a good reminder that the risks are still out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I think, we've got to be careful in talking about the things, and also just in like, it is very strange to have to make these considerations, because normally like the decisions, not even like, objectively bad decisions like of your friends, don't impact you as much. And so you can be like, oh, like, yeah, this is my friend, like I don't love some of the stuff they do, but like, yeah, we still hang out. Whereas you sometimes have to have even more like uncomfortable conversations or interactions with people, be like, hey, like I like you and you're my friend, but like, hey, like I know that you do this, and so like I want to see you later, but like right now we can't hang out. And I definitely had to have some of those conversations over the summer, and while at school I've had a few of them as well, of like, hey, I like you, but like I see what you post on your social media, let's hang out when this is all done, but like I can't justify that to myself right now, and that's often really uncomfortable. But I think we've been lucky in that our friend group is generally pretty mature. And so when I've had those conversations with people, I've most commonly just been met with like, oh, I totally understand. No worries. I get it. Like, no hard feelings. Whereas I've talked with people who have had similar conversations with their friends, and it's all blown up of people getting
Absolutely.
really upset. And that just hasn't happened in our friend group, which has been phenomenal.
Right. Absolutely great. Yeah, I think, like you're saying, for so much of our life, we're able to separate our friends' bad decisions from our, tolerance for risk. Right.
Yeah.
If I go to a major university, there are parties. I don't drink, but friends of mine go and get drunk every single weekend, and I can just not see them for 2 days, and I don't have to be around it, and it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Um, Now, if somebody does something I think is unsafe, they have to live to my standards of safety for 2 weeks before I feel
Yeah.
safe meeting them.
Yeah, and it's not even always like sometimes we're just in different situations. Like you were living with your grandpa, and so like
Right.
not even from like a personal decision, but just from like, oh, my like risk factor, like my acceptable level of risk is different for a reason outside of my control. And I think especially with young people, that was a really weird part of it, because I have like, even though the virus does impact young people, right? Like I've never been worried for my own life or my own health. Like I know there is a chance that I could get sick, but like there are bigger health risks to me than the virus personally right now. Um, but like
Absolutely.
my parents or my grandparents, like it is still a very big risk for them. And so like I was having to decide on my risk profile based off of the people I love, not necessarily based off of myself. Um,
That was a very awkward thing to navigate. I don't know if I speak for you. I suspect that I do. But we are in a period of life where becoming independent and having your own life and lifestyle is a really big part of what we're working through.
Definitely.
And so to be forced to consider every action you take and its impact on everyone who you are in relationship with is not really a big theme of being a young adult. A young adult is all
especially
about,
especially in
yeah,
the context, I think, of um, our social interactions and our relationships. um,
absolutely.
because like there is certainly some like there's something to be said about like, hey, you need to, like, when you're like become a college student or like a young adult, you need to kind of figure out who you are as a person, right? But there also is still like, hey, be considerate to others, like, you know in most cases, like, if you've got a good relationship with your parents, like, be considerate of them, but like you can still be like, oh, I have relationships that maybe I don't mention at home or whatever. Or even just like, you know whether it's going to a party or just seeing your group of friends, you don't normally have to, like, those don't normally those are unusual things to have to consider in context of especially your family or with other people. I think
Absolutely.
most of us keep kind of our sets of people who we care about somewhat compartmentalized, like family, group, some group of friends, some other group of friends, our coworkers. But now we need to consider all of those people as, because we are the common connection between them. We've got to think of our grandparents, our coworkers, our friends, and like random guy at Subway, like kind of on the same level because we're the common denominator.
Right. For example, over Christmas break, I would tell my parents, I'm going, peace, and leave. And I would
Yeah.
go hang out with friends for hours. And it wasn't a big deal. They had no idea what I was doing. They trusted me. And now that's just not something I can do. I can't compartmentalize my life like that.
Yeah.
I hope that this makes our generation much more considerate of the ways that, even outside of a pandemic, the way we live our life affects everybody we interact with.
Yeah.
I have seen a lot of young people who have simply failed to learn that lesson, which is sad. And it may just be that the way our media is set up, that's the stories that make headlines.
Oh, definitely. Like there is for sure some of that, but like I think I was talking with one of my professors about the fact that when I walk around campus, like when I walk through the area of campus that's predominantly freshman housing, I see way less social distancing and way less masks. And I don't think that's because like freshmen are stupid or that they're like bad people. But when we were talking, we are just like, yeah, in general, freshmen like often make mistakes. Like freshmen are like it's a joke and it's a stereotype, but like it's also true. Like freshmen are known for like making mistakes and doing silly things.
Right.
And it shouldn't be a surprise that like they're gonna make mistakes in the context of a pandemic because they make mistakes in every other context.
Absolutely. I remember the first 3 months being at college kind of felt like falling down the stairs in some ways.
Yeah.
In that I was thrown headfirst into being independent and being an adult and managing my schedule and my social life. And there were a lot of things in which I made perhaps unwise choices because they were my choices. And I'm like,
oh, I
can
definitely
do it if I
did.
want to.
Like
Yeah.
my freshman year, like I think my freshman year went pretty well for me, but like, did I do some self-destructive things? Yeah. Like,
Because I finally had the freedom to do them.
yeah.
And I feel badly for the freshmen this year because the stakes are so much higher for them.
And especially when you're coming off of a generally ruined like their end of their senior year, like most people, most freshmen, their senior year, like the good parts of it, whether it was prom or graduation or a big, their big thing at the end of the year, their senior party, their whatever, their open house,
their concert, their show,
yeah, it was different, or it didn't happen. And then their summer, it was, which is supposed to be their big bash where they say goodbye to their high school friends, or whatever. Often I think the summer before college is thought of as like either a summer to take a break or a summer to make some money at a job, both of which are much less viable. It's much less viable to have a relaxing break with your high school friends, and it's also much less viable to try and make a lot of money before college. And so they're like, my summer sucked, then in my senior year sucked, all because of, I think, oftentimes restrictions that they felt were out of their control because they were out of their control. And now that finally they have control over their life, and like for many of them for the first time, a real sense of control, it leads to poor decision making, which is understandable but tragic.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess that's been our experience over the last 6 months.
I do have another question for you, James.
Yes. Before we close up this segment.
Pandemic stereotypes. What have you fallen into? I mean, I would just like to point to Exhibit A, which I believe, did you say it was the 50-pound bag of flour?
Yes, I am the pandemic baker. It actually ended up being much more than that. I bought 4 50-pound bags of flour.
Oh my gosh!
I used 200 pounds of flour to bake bread, which I did the math. I think is 500 pounds of bread. I baked. To be fair, I have a very large family, and we like to eat toast for breakfast.
Well, and you baked before the pandemic too. Like you cooked and baked a lot before the pandemic.
Yes.
So you're not just hopping on the bandwagon.
No, I love cooking, and a niche interest is sourdough bread. So I came home, we were eating toast a lot, and I just started baking bread. And I would bake 8 to 10 loaves of bread a week.
Yeah,
and my
no,
family would eat them.
you'd always be sending us messages of the bread you were baking.
Yes. I got a lot better over the last 6 months at breaking bread. Let me tell you, I have noticed how much better at bread baking I got, which is fair because I did it 4 times a week.
Yeah, you would improve.
Yes. In the early days, it was really difficult to get flour.
Well, and wasn't yeast, like, you did sourdough, so it's not a problem. But I remember there
Right.
were like yeast shortages. Like,
Yes.
people would go to bakeries and be like, I don't want your bread, but can I buy your flour and yeast?
Yeah. I mean, like cupcake stores or bakeries where you would normally go as like a Panera Bread, even, right? Places where you normally go and socialize with people became the place you went for flour and yeast because it wasn't in the grocery store, which was really a weird experience.
That is very strange.
Yeah. So yes, my pandemic stereotype is the baker. I was the baker. You dyed your hair.
That I did.
It's gone now, but it was
It
very
is.
glorious.
I have another bottle. I did semi-permanent dye. But yeah, I really fell into that angsty stereotype, Because, like, who's gonna see me? I've always wanted to dye my hair, and I'm like, well, I figure under a stay-at-home order is probably the lowest stakes time ever to dye your hair.
That's true. I mean, once it really had like become internalized that I was home and I wasn't seeing people, I did a lot of strange things. I shaved my head, not
Yeah.
all the way, but
But like,
it was pretty short. Yeah.
yeah.
So it was strange times.
I'm trying to think if I fell into any other stereotypes. I think it was probably just the hair dyeing.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
didn't buy a pet.
Nope, didn't buy a pet. That was good.
I know someone, one of the people I was doing research with, she got a cat
Oh.
during the pandemic. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, you are a college student. Like, you might regret that, but like, fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, it could be worse. A friend of mine got a dog and then it didn't go well, so they decided the solution was to get another dog. Do we want to perhaps wrap up the podcast by talking about what our future plans are with this project?
Yeah, I think a little bit of meta. Why are we here? Why are we talking? And what do we? Why talking?
We're not going to tell you the when and where, unfortunately. Well,
No.
you can guess the when. We just talked about
Yeah, the when is now, Tuesdays, because that's hopefully
Yep.
when it'll go out. Although you'll probably hear this a week after it was recorded.
That sounds like a good schedule.
Yeah, every other Tuesday. The goal is to stick to a schedule, and that is because the real reason for this podcast is not because we aspire to be professional podcasters or because
Absolutely
we think
not.
we're particularly good at it.
Nope.
It's because we have like a productivity complex, and so justifying and like consistently talking to each other is a challenge. And so we are making a podcast so we can convince part of our brain that we're doing something productive, because that's the reality of it. That's the world we live in.
It really is. It's a very strange mindset. I was thinking about this the other week. I saw some flowers in the store that I really liked, and I thought, man, I wish I had somebody in my life I could buy flowers for because I really want to get those flowers.
And I said you should buy them for you.
But that's not how my mind works. And I think
that would be unacceptable. Why would you need flowers? It'd just be a useless expense. But buying flowers for someone else, completely justifiable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that this podcast falls into a similar pattern. I know that I will work myself too hard and will not take time to call my friends if I don't feel like it is a project. It is something to achieve. And so here we are. Yeah. I think some other things that we might talk about in the future of the podcast are biotechnology. We're both big
we're biology people.
Yeah, biotechnology and the future of science are really fascinating topics.
Yeah. I think also we're definitely both interested in discussing theology, specifically Christian theology, because that's really the only experience we have with theology. to kind of fit with the theme of the podcast, the idea behind an episode where we talked about theology would be to tackle some kind of contemporary issue or question and examine it from like a Christian, specifically for us, a Christian Reformed theological perspective, but talk about how that's impacted us like personally in our lives. And I think often that some of those episodes might take a form of like, we'll find something that's like sexuality or youth in the church.
Yeah.
Or I think talking about how we should consider religion, our religious beliefs when we think about politics.
Yeah.
And it would be less of like, it's not about like a sermon. Like neither of us are qualified to do that or to actually give a definitive, hey, here's what scripture says. It's more of like this is what we wonder and how we feel.
Yeah. So talking about, sexuality and the American church's culture around it would be a likely future topic. In addition to that, we're both, interested in politics, and I think that discussions of American political systems and political culture are a likely candidate for future discussion.
Yeah, and in anything where we're like, I like to think that this podcast, we might talk about religion, but it's not a religious podcast. We might talk about politics, but it's not a political podcast. And I want to stay true to the concept of talking about our own experience. So I would never want to hide like the slant that we have or pretend that we don't have it. Like if I was talking about religion, like I'm going to say where I stand. Or if I'm talking about politics, like if you haven't guessed, like we both have a pretty liberal slant on politics.
We both believe in the pandemic, for one thing.
Yeah. And so, I don't want it to be, I don't want us to get like hyper politicized. I'm also not going to pretend like I don't have an opinion.
I think it's a good thing to make a distinction between political and partisan.
Yeah.
I think we have strong politics. I wouldn't say that either of us are strongly partisan.
Oh no, gosh,
no.
Not a shocker. I'm going to vote Democrat, but I don't like it.
Yeah. And I think most people of our philosophy feel the same way. So.
I know, it's such a bummer. And I think also we might talk about things of like, I think the broad heading might just be like emotions and mental health.
Yeah, that's a likely topic.
I think, I mentioned productivity, but kind of examining it, I want to at some point talk to you about like how we define productivity, as we've addressed a little bit, and even in classically defined productivity, like, school or work, I think it could be interesting to have a conversation about like, okay, what are some of our work strategies? Like how do we get things done? Because I think we have some different approaches. Like I'm definitely a hardcore procrastinator. And I think examining that could be interesting. I'm very passionate about mental health. And so I think, there's so many conversations we could talk about there, especially in relation to other things, like talking about it in terms of, gender norms or the pandemic or, I think a guaranteed topic for us will be like masculinity and male gender norms.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I hope that gives our listeners a bit of a flavor for what the future of this podcast might look like.
Yeah.
You will hear from us, sounds like every other Tuesday.
Every other Tuesday, probably. Probably.
Yep.
Yes.
So until 2 Tuesdays from now, I'm James.
And I'm Noah. And this has been our experience.
We'll work on that ending.
No expectations, no disappointments.
This is the pilot episode. It's okay.
Yeah, it's great. This is all staying in.
Oh yeah, I think that would actually be a really fun idea. If instead of having a cutoff at the end, we just kind of trail out and we talk for
just struggle.
I hear you again. Yeah, it's almost like.